I was on vacation in Ithaca with my boyfriend at the time. We had literally, I'm talking 10 minutes, just gotten into town and stopped at a suspension bridge near Cornell's campus. I'm terrified of heights. And so my boyfriend was coaxing me step by step over the bridge. It was gorgeous, and we stopped at the middle to take a picture. On the side we had come from, there was a parking lot with steps leading to the bottom of the gorge, but on the far side there were hiking paths with no barrier. A woman walked past us and offered to take a picture for us. We declined, and she smiled and walked quickly to the far side of the bridge where she smoothly jumped off into the gorge. There was not a second of hesitation. It was almost like she expected the path to keep going. The sound of a person hitting the ground from a jump like that sticks with you. A group of friends was staying at this remote cabin that one of my friend's cousins owned. There were no roads leading to the cabin, and it was a good 3-4 day hike from where you parked the cars. I couldn't go at the same time as everyone else due to work obligations, so I decided to head up the same day, but later. It would mean I would have to camp for a night by myself, though. The latter part of the trail is too dangerous to be taken at night, especially by someone who doesn't know it. I didn't care. I was kind of looking forward to it, as I've never camped alone before, so I was in the middle of these woods when the sun went down. I got my camp set up in this small clearing, probably 40 feet across. Get my campfire going and pitch my small one-person tent. Do all that camping stuff like cooking hot dogs on a stick over the fire and s'mores. I'd probably stay up for a good 2 or 3 hours after dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were somewhat short. The entire time, I thought I heard shit moving in the woods on the edge of the clearing. I didn't think anything of it at first because the woods are full of animals. But as the night went on, I realized that whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention, it made 4 or 5 laps around before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped as soon as I stooped up, and I thought I heard some sounded going away through the woods. I just shrugged it off, thinking it was some fox that was curious that got scared when I stood up. I decided it's time to sleep, douse the fire, and climb into my tent. I start to doze off and stay in that half-asleep, half-awake state for a while. I normally hear weird shit when I'm in this state, so I don't think much of it when I hear a voice. Something wakes me all the way up, though, and I realize the voice is real and right outside my tent. It's just above a whisper, and I'm not sure if it was another language or if they were just speaking English in such a way that I couldn't understand. I lay there for some time, I don't know how long, listening and waiting for something to happen. There's just enough moonlight to light up the walls of the tent, so I can see when a hand presses into the wall of my tent down near my foot. This freaks me out, and I sit up quickly. Whoever was outside of the tent tore out of there, like running full sprint through the woods. I get out of the tent and shine my flashlight around and see nothing. I was expecting there to be a bloody handprint on the tent, but nope. Didn't sleep that night. Packed up camp at first light that morning and booked it to the cabin. I was playing around with a radio once when I was a kid, just slowly spanning through the static, trying to find a station. I had found an old television antenna, attached it to the side of our house, and ran a wire out my window to it with an alligator clip attached to the radio antenna, allowing me to get a way broader range of signals. So I'm sitting there early in the morning, like 2 a.m., slowly sweeping frequencies. And suddenly I get to this station that's playing this very weird crackling sound. It sounded sort of like cracking knuckles, or maybe Rice Krispies cereal, but with a fixed rhythmic pattern instead of being random. I sat there listening to it for a second, then it suddenly stopped. And this faint voice says, "It doesn't work. We're already dead. We're already dead." It took a second for the weight of the words to hit me, but when they did, I freaked out and almost threw the radio across the room. I'm pretty sure it was just someone messing around with a radio transmitter, but dang if it didn't scare the crap out of me at the time. My parents bought their first house back in 1972. It was a fixer-upper, but they decided to move in right away and fix things as time/money permitted. Within a few days of moving in, the new neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They also let my parents know that the previous owners had moved out after a nasty divorce. They had lost their second baby from CDDs, and their relationship went downhill from there. My parents were horrified, more so because they were newly pregnant and couldn't imagine going through such a thing. They eventually pretty much forgot all about it. Life went on. They were in love with their new life in their new house. In preparation for the baby, they decided to wallpaper the nursery. Now, my dad told my mom there was no need in wallpapering the inside of the closet, but she insisted. She was kneeling down, scraping off old paint inside of the closet, when her eyes fell upon something that made her blood turn to ice. Written in crayon at about eye level for a kindergartner, in childish scrawl was, "I killed the baby." On the story of Karen Wetterhahn. Essentially, she was a chemistry professor at Dartmouth. She was working with an organic mercury compound that was relatively unknown at the time. A drop spilled on her gloved hand. No big deal usually. Turns out dimethyl mercury penetrates latex gloves really quickly, and a drop on the hand is a death sentence. She slipped into a coma about 6 months later and then died. The really terrifying part is the description of her coma from Wikipedia. One of her former students described it as not being the kind of coma I'd expected. She was thrashing about. Her husband saw tears rolling down her face. I asked if she was in pain. The doctor said it didn't appear that her brain could even register pain. I'm so glad I'm not a chemist. Computers are friendly. My wife and I used to live in a townhome that backed to some woods. We both took off work one day to get some things done in the yard, cutting the grass, weeding our large flower beds, laying mulch, etc. Our yard wasn't big. It took about 2 full grass clipping bags. I would walk a couple of feet into the woods and dump them in a pile. As I'm walking back to empty the second bag, something in the middle of the woods catches my eye. Something out of place, and it's moving. I crouched down to get a better look, and I just froze. At first, I could make out a pair of shoes just swaying back and forth, and then was able to see the legs and body of a teenager. There in the middle of the woods was a teenage boy who had hung himself. Next to the tree, I could see a skateboard leaning up against it. I yelled for my wife to call the police and started running back to try and save him, but he was gone. His body was limp and his head was just slumped over. His dark, scruffy hair was slowly blowing in the breeze. The cops came and quickly cut him down, and they were gone. As it turns out, he was having problems getting along with his parents, and this is what he decided to do. One night, after drinking and smoking at a pond near an elementary school, my friends decided to take a shortcut through the field and basketball court, like they normally do. As they cross the field, they see some dude just standing around the basketball goal, not moving or anything. My friends thought this was kind of weird and tried whistling and calling out to get the guy's attention. No luck. As they reached the court, they realized the kid was hanging just right off the ground. They run to my friend's house, which is right by the court exit, and call the cops. Turns up, the kid got in a fight with his mom over a cell phone and got kicked out of the house. He was homeless for a few days and slept on the school benches. I didn't personally know him, but he was a year younger than us, and we all went to that elementary school and high school. This was a few years ago on a night scuba dive. There were 8 of us in the group, including our dive master and his assistant. We had just finished our dive and were gathered up in a circle, ready to ascend and get out of the water. When my dive master freezes, he takes his flashlight and pointing it outside our circle of divers, he catches something circling us with the beam. Turns out it was a 12-foot-long great white shark. At this point, half of the group are trying to keep the shark illuminated as it circles us, and remarkably, everyone stayed calm. The only things going through my mind were iterations of these 2 thoughts. Don't look like a yummy, delicious, fatty seal, and that I hope I taste terrible. My dive master gets our attention and slowly puts his thumb up and then makes an upward motion. We all begin to ascend, and the shark kept with us until we were maybe 10 feet from the surface. Then it turned off into the darkness and was gone. I did not go back into the ocean for about a week after that. I was fixing a jumped belt on an old Gleaner K2 in the middle of the field in the middle of the night when my dog, a 110 Elbes Lab, who's usually sniffing for birds when I stop, is standing still and letting out a growl I've never heard from him. I shine my almost dead flashlight where he's looking, and I see 3 sets of eyes change quickly from a glow to a silhouette to coyotes. They're pretty harmless on their own, but in a pack, they're relentless. I call for my dog and bolt for the cab, but he runs at them instead. I stood on the platform for what felt like hours as my dog tried to fight off the now 5 coyotes. I couldn't let my buddy die, so I grabbed the hammer and wrapped my jacket around my arm. The second I got close, one of them went for my leg, and I offered my arm instead, which it gladly took, and I swung down on its back with all my might. Second coyote, same as the first, grabs my arm and I swing at his back. The other 3 are switching between fighting and dragging my dog into the corn, and like an idiot, I throw the hammer at the pack with no effect. I kick the one doing the most dragging, and he thankfully runs off. I picked up the hammer and swing at the one my dog doesn't have, and stood back and watched my dog chase off the 5th. He came back bloody and limping, but no worse for wear. But even with the rabies shot, he started showing symptoms about a week later. Toughest thing I had to do to date was putting that dog down. I used to work in a trailer park for my parents. Quite often people would start using methamphetamine, begin to fall behind on rent, and get evicted. Whenever we evicted someone, their trailer was usually too torn to crap to actually do anything useful with it. Essentially, to prevent having a pile of crap trailer in the middle of the park, we'd buy it from them and just tear it down. Anyway, the scary, creepy part, many of these occupants had children. More than half of all of the children's rooms I found had locks on the doors from the outside. Inside the children's rooms, it was always quite evident that the kids would sometimes be locked inside for days at a time, due to the bathroom corners that would sometimes appear. The doors on the insides of the rooms typically had scratch marks along the edge of the door and the door frame. Getting rid of all the stuff inside before beginning demolition always frightened me. I was always afraid that I'd end up finding a dead child somewhere among the filth. It never happened, but the odds of it potentially happening were, in my opinion, quite high. One of the scariest things I ever heard was when I worked in retail. My store used to do layaway, and that was where I worked. Right by the layaway counter, we had 3 bathrooms, a men's multi-stall, a women's multi-stall, and a family bathroom. Well, only the family bathroom had a door that locked. All the others had the push-pull swing door. I was in the back cleaning up, and I thought I heard screaming, so I walked out front by the counter. I heard more screaming. I was not sure at first where it was coming from. I ran and checked the men's and women's bathroom, and they were empty, and I still heard the crying and screaming. It was coming from the family bathroom. I banged on the door, but the yelling, screaming, crying kept going on. It sounded like a child, and I had no idea what was going on. I called for a manager because I had no way of getting in the door since it was locked. This whole time there is still crying, screaming, banging. After several attempts of trying to open the door, we called 911. We had no idea what was going on, but it didn't sound good. I think about 15 minutes at this point, although it felt forever. Then the sound check stopped. No more banging, crying, nothing. We banged on the door until the police came. When they finally did, they had to kick the door in since we had no key. As we all stood around and looked in, all we saw was blood all over the place. We were not really sure what happened at first, but the police told us to back up, and that is when they pulled out a lady and a child. A bloody child, maybe 3. We all just stood there in shock. The child was not moving. We thought he was dead because of all the blood. They took the lady away in handcuffs and the child to the hospital. We all had to give statements. Later, my manager told me what happened. They just snapped. He wouldn't stop crying, and she just had enough and did whatever she could to make him stop. He did live. I was sure he was dead, but he wasn't. She had just knocked him out from hitting him so hard. This story is not scary in the ghost sense, but for that to happen right behind the door and not know what is going on or be able to help, it was pretty scary to me. Woke up one night around 1 a.m., heard the shower was on. I first thought it was my brother. He works night shifts, so thought he had came home late and was in the shower. It went on for about half an hour until I got up and went to see what he was doing. No one was in the shower. My brother wasn't home yet. I was the only one in the house. And still to this day, I have no idea how it turned on or who did it. Almost 5 years later, I still think about it and crap myself. Even writing this now, I feel like turning every light on in the house. Why do I do this to myself? A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45, but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door, and I got a quick peek. Her walks all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow, stained 50-year-old carpets, dog crap, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night, I had my GF staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed, looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then, the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there. You should lock your door at night, she says, and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongues. She has a plastic bag in her hand with a rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell death from the bag. At this point, I'm scared. She's obviously very insane, and I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask what the hell is going on. The guy's as scared as me. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him holding a power drill. Now, I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically pooping myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently, she is a violent schizo and she hasn't taken her meds. But they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution. And in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. Never saw her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door, and I got a quick peek. Her walks all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow, stained 50-year-old carpets, dog crap, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night, I had my GF staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed, looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then, the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there. You should lock your door at night, she says, and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongues. She has a plastic bag in her hand with a rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell death from the bag. At this point, I'm scared. She's obviously very insane, and I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask what the hell is going on. The guy's as scared as me. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him holding a power drill. Now, I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically pooping myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently, she is a violent schizo and she hasn't taken her meds. But they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution. And in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. Never saw her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. When I was 7, I woke up in the middle of the night with an earache. I decided to tell my mom and stepdad and walked out of my room. Someone was sitting on the chair in the living room, about 3 feet away from my bedroom door. The person looked strange. The face was just kind of distorted, but it was dark and I couldn't see well. "Mom?" I asked. The person shook their head and I started getting scared. "Mike?" The person shook their head again. I decided the best course of option was to go back to bed so I wouldn't have to walk past this person. I climbed in bed and closed my eyes for a second, before opening them and seeing the person standing in my doorway, smiling madly and nodding furiously. I screamed at the top of my lungs and closed my eyes. My stepdad came running out of his room in his underwear with a baseball bat. That was a scary sight in itself. There was nothing there but clothes my mom had folded and put on the chair were strewn about the living room. For the longest time, I told myself it was my cat sitting on the clothes. Like and subscribe.